Welcome to Mediascape, Insights from Digital Changemakers, a speaker series and podcast brought to you by USC Annenberg's Digital Media Management program. Join us as we unlock the secrets to success in an increasingly digital world. Hello everyone today, and welcome to our latest episode of Mediascape, Insights from Digital Changemakers, brought to you by the Digital Media Management program here at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. My name is Joseph Itaya.
And I am Annika Jackson. And we are so thrilled today to have Cortney Woodruff, multiple-time tech entrepreneur, with us today to talk about his latest project, Assemble, which really focuses on being an online platform to create digital equity. So Cortney, take it away. Explain, what does digital equity mean and what was your journey to get here?
Well, first of all, hey guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Super excited to kind of talk and share the journey. But yeah, Annika, back to your original question, what is digital equity? I think, from the lens of even a college student, you go to campus for opportunities and for networking, whether it's having access to professors or having access to the relationships that the university has built, whether it's, your career counselor and having specific pathways into internships, so on and so forth. And I think we live in a world where there have always been some barriers for minorities or those that are necessarily not inside of the political spectrum. And digital equity, in my opinion, is a way to, through technology in the realm of digital innovation, kind of democratize a lot of these things and make it accessible to all. So yes, Assemble is the new venture. And what we do is we make it easy for you to discover and connect directly with diverse professionals that are oftentimes highly accomplished. I mean, if we've done our jobs right, we have kind of went and found some of the most sought after individuals around the world. And we, through digital technology and our platform, are making it easy for you to get personalized advice from them. So yeah.
I got a question for you, and thanks again so much for joining us, and great to be with you today. Cortney, take us back, if you wouldn't mind, back to the beginning, because so often that origin of where dreams and even your personal journey begin is really inspiring for our students and our community to hear. When did you begin? Maybe it was way back when you were a kid with your first lemonade stand, but what was it that led you early on in your life to be drawn to entrepreneurship instead of just going and getting the job?
I think it's kind of in my DNA. My grandfather on my father's side was one of the first African Americans to own a grocery store in Jackson, Mississippi. And so being the first grandchild and running around the store, I vividly remember my grandparents running a small business. And so that's probably kind of where I got it from. And then there's some things within my personality. But I think as it relates to tech, I think the inspiration for me probably came my freshman year in college. I was in Alabama, attending Alabama A&M, and I wanted to go to Wall Street. And there literally were no options available for me as I kind of went through the traditional career services department on the campus. And so after just manually finding students from around the country that had went to other HBCUs and had successfully procured internships, I kind of just did my own program, like reach out to them actually through Facebook. And then they reached out to the program directors. And then I was able to get internships on the East Coast and had never been to the East Coast, but I was going by what I had read in books, what I was seeing on TV on Bloomberg and whatnot. And I think instantly then I was like, I'm going to build something for every student like me that don't have a pathway, whether because, the universities may not necessarily have those relationships in certain industries or sectors, or, you're in just a region of the country or the world where geographically you just don't have access. It's like if I wanted to be a chemical engineer and get into the oil industry, it kind of makes sense to be in Texas. But if you're in Texas and you want to go to Wall Street, you see, so imagine being in some rural areas such as, Alabama or Mississippi. And so I wanted to solve that problem. That was actually my first foray into entrepreneurship as it related to building something out with technology. And it was just me trying to scratch my own itch.
I think, Cortney, that's how so many great entrepreneurs are born, right? You find something that is an issue that you're trying to solve for yourself, and then you realize that it's an issue for other people out there.
Yeah.
So you went to the East Coast, but then you ended up going to business school internationally. So can you talk about the move from everything that you were doing, the spark that was inspiring you, and then what happened when you went to business school?
Yeah, I think, I did the Wall Street thing. I graduated. I came back home, and it was like right after the recovery of the '08 financial crisis. So this was around 2010. And I just knew that either entrepreneurship was going to continue to be the path I took, or maybe banking, because I thought I loved finance. And I just couldn't seem to crack the code. I didn't have the relationships needed to land the gigs on Wall Street. And part of it was just the timing, because we had just had the financial crisis and a lot of firms had massive layoffs. And I mean, this was an unprecedented thing where, we had the bailouts and things of that nature. So I couldn't really put it too much on me and my lack of ability. But I just remember going, okay, let's go to business school. And I just kept having a bad taste in my mouth, so to speak, with not being able to get a job and get my career started on Wall Street after, graduating with a 4.0 and having all of these amazing internships. And then I just remember really being more consumed with an entrepreneurial idea I had while I was in business school, as opposed to the way business school was structured, which was at this time preparing you to either go off to a large investment bank or a large consulting firm, which makes total sense. And maybe that's something I should have figured out before I attended, but I enjoyed it. But I also realized that Silicon Valley was going to be my business school curriculum. And at the time I had an idea, and I realized, as expensive as school was and as amazing as living in Europe was, and having the amazing opportunity to have attended the top business school in the world at the age of 22, I was more of a cowboy. And so I dropped out and I moved to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, actually. I knew zero people at the time. Like, I knew zero people in the state of California. And so I decided to just stay in a hostel for startups and build a network from scratch, literally from scratch. And that's been like 10 years ago.
That's amazing. So Cortney, Assemble, which is the main company that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, that's not your first startup, is it?
No, it's not. No. So when I moved to San Francisco and left school, I was thinking of this thing, and it was like, how do I help parents initially find trainers across different sports categories for their kids? So very personal trainers, personal soccer coach or whatever. And I was thinking about the market of high school students and all the money that parents spend. And normally it's in hopes of just getting a nice scholarship to attend college. And so how do you get to, the upper edge? And I was thinking about all the college athletes that normally go back home for the summer, or the retired, professional in the neighborhood or semi-pro. And so that's kind of what we were working on. And then we narrowed it down, trying to build out this marketplace, and realized that we needed to be much more specific to personal trainers, ironically, and adults. And the timing of it is what really predicated that, because Instagram and social media had just emerged. And there was this phenomenal trend where personal trainers for the first time were actually being acknowledged outside of the gym. I remember thinking, in 2009, if you search for a personal trainer online, what you got was a list of certifications that the consumer didn't even understand. So that it really carried no weight. And so Instagram was like the first time they could kind of showcase their lifestyle, their results, their clients. And then there was just like this major unlock for consumers, like, oh, if I can see the results of every person, it's like watching one of the old fitness commercials. They work because this was the only time the consumer could actually see the before and the after, but no one had unlocked that for the individual trainer until social media came about. So they were their own commercial, and social media was distribution, And so they were growing, but they didn't necessarily have the tools and the infrastructure to manage the rapid increase in demand for their services, whether it was a bunch of classes in the park or how do I just work out from home and follow your guide? So we created Trainer's Vault, which was basically a digital management platform for personal trainers to manage their in-person events, as well as upload content and be able to distribute it and stream it directly to their customers. And so that's what I worked on for the first 8 years of my entrepreneurial career. It's what led me to drop out of school and live in Silicon Valley for around 2 years just to build a network and basically redo the MBA, but the hard knocks of entrepreneurship in the technology sector. And then eventually moved down to SoCal, LA, because I thought it's a little bit easier to market fitness in Los Angeles and Venice Beach than it would be in San Francisco. So a lot of knowledge over those 8 years.
Now, what is going on with Trainer's Vault now? And then how did you make the pivot and transition to decide now is the time I need to launch that idea that I had when I was trying to get connected to the right people to reach my dreams?
Well, after 8 years, we just rounded it down. The timing, it was just like as any entrepreneur know, with their first startups, they normally either die, they get bought for a modest means, or once in a while, you have the Mark Zuckerbergs. And we kind of just like wounded the company down after a while. And the irony is, as a founder, I just was mentally exhausted. I think I had worked on something for 8 years. I looked up and I was in my 30s. And, when I started, I was dreaming I was, just close to the age of 21. It's like, where did my 20s go? And I had expanded the company and fundraised and found, customers around Asia, across Africa. I mean, we went around the world with this thing. And it was one of those things where in a way we were a little too early, but it worked. But it just didn't blow up, the way to make it sustainable. And then there's, once again, going back to network, probably didn't have the resources to hire the right people that didn't necessarily have a crystal ball, but probably had enough experience to see what we were doing and be able to correlate it to other things that had worked, whether it was within digital technology, maybe it was the music industry or whatever have you, to go, oh, I see these trends. I know how to make this go from, 10 to 100. I've seen this play in the music industry before, in Hollywood or in the film and television industry. This is what you do to get sponsorships, do this, so on and so forth. So as I thought about how hard that journey had been for 8 years, I realized the number one thing was really social capital and insights. And as I just kind of was thinking about the last 8 years and how hard it was to build a network from scratch and the impressive Rolodex that I had built. And I think the company, we had a couple million customers or users. That was a really hard journey. And there was always these little moments where one person, after searching for 4 years, would always unlock something for me within a 10-minute conversation. And the first thing through the lens of diversity was, why can't I find people that look like me that can, create that unlock? And why does it take so much time to find those individuals? Because you oftentimes feel like you can spend as much time trying to network as you can, or as you do, just practically working on whatever it is that you're trying to work on, right? And so we wanted to create something that solved for that. And so initially it was just like, how can I aggregate all of the successful, entrepreneurs and professionals of color and allow them to tell their stories in a way that no one's ever really been able to see before. And we did that. But then, as ideas evolve, it's about access as much as it is about learning. We've had YouTube and we've had Masterclass and Oprah had OWN, and we have all of these things where we're constantly consuming advice. But the magical moment is when you're able to meet someone that you didn't think that would either take the time to converse with you, or you just didn't think you had access to. And so we're trying to leverage technology to do that for everyone. So it's a matter of diverse advice and opinions and perspectives, but it's also a matter of giving individuals access to diverse individuals.
We have a lot of entrepreneurship that happens in our program here at USC. And one of the things that we've noticed with our students is that there's a sense of just mystery and maybe even a little bit of concern that these young students and young entrepreneurs have, or even if they're mid-career professionals where they go, whoa, that's something that's a little bit intimidating. That's something that only special people can go and do. And for us, we try to demystify entrepreneurship and just say, like, look, it's just a series of small steps. It's not a Hail Mary pass. It's just get a first down and then another first down. And so It feels like with the fact that you're able to connect your audience with these entrepreneurs who've been, just like you said, there's no magic to it. It's pretty cool that you're able to give them the opportunity to demystify this whole idea of the entrepreneurial journey by connecting them with people who just had to figure it out just the way that you did.
Yeah. I mean, as humans, we evolve. Literally, we went from, horse and carriage to, we have these big things with four wheels that are all across the highways now, right? So it's just constant innovation. And if I know how to do something, and maybe it did take me 10 years to figure it out, it could take me 5 minutes to share that with someone and save them 10 years of their life, which is why sometimes people go, hey, it's not about paying me because it only took me 5 minutes. You're paying me what you pay me because it took me 10 years to know how to do it in 5 minutes. And so, yes, I want to be able to create, a culture of information sharing and advice sharing. And I want to be able to do it in a way where it's real time. Like even now as we talk and film, I don't know if something will pop out and resonate with one of the students that watch this, but now they have a free way, and it's free because it's me. I'm the founder of the platform. But, ideally, if there's a QR code, or instead of saying follow me on Instagram, it's, hey, if you have a question, you want to pick my brain because you just watched this podcast, just go to this link and send it to me. Because we consume so many things and our brains process, but what we never get a chance to do is double down and really investigate outside of Google or a stranger's opinion, whatever question pops up in our mind as we're listening and digesting, information as we, going down the rabbit hole of whether it's TikTok, YouTube, or just whatever it is, even reading a book. So, yeah.
I'd like to find out, because I worked with you from the beginning of this project, and it was Be Great, Change to Assemble. You've had some pivots. You've had some opportunities to be bought by competitors. And you said no and turned it down because you knew that you had a certain vision. So I'd love for you to talk through how hard was it to realize in that moment, because I think this is something every entrepreneur faces, those moments when you have to choose a different road, when you have to choose a different path, and then you have to also find the financing to dream, right? And the people who will stand behind you and with you to be able to achieve that pivot and that next level.
Yeah, I think when those acquisition talks began and surfaced, I think there's a combination of just being young. Mind you, this was just maybe 4 years ago, I think, but just being young and dreaming and really wanting to try to do this on our own. So it wasn't really a hard decision to turn down, to be honest. But I think when you grow into business and you really think of what is the outcome, and there's so many things you can't foresee, I think we made the right decision. But there are often times where you realize that even if it's the right decision, you may have made it with not a lot of insights that you have going forward. I think the biggest thing about us is seeing where we are and realizing some of the things that we didn't know, some of the things that we probably needed to have known, and just also just being participants of just the broader economy and the market. And as it relates to tech, the technology sector, Silicon Valley kind of slowed down over the last 2 years. So, it's a weird way you turn down an acquisition because you think you can keep fundraising, and then the market just crashes for 2 years. Talk about an entrepreneurial journey, right? What do you do? In our case, we tried to figure out what our business model was, what was the OpEx around it, what type of capital we needed to have allocated to either continue going in the direction that we were going, or what can we do to reset, make the business a little bit more cheaper to run while still trying to solve the problem we're solving through the lens of technology. So for us, it was, how do we pivot out of creating content that's really expensive, where people are able to kind of sit back in their homes and watch and learn, streaming courses on demand? And how do we bring on tons of experts at once and give all of those customers direct access to them, which actually, ironically, is what they were requesting anyways.
I got a nuts and bolts question for you. You've operated now in Silicon Valley and then also down in Silicon Beach, and you probably know both those ecosystems fairly well. So for our students who are just getting started, maybe they're thinking about their own entrepreneurial journey, what are the differences and pros and cons for certain kinds of industries between those two locations?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. And I think to keep it simple and relevant, when you are in the tech sector and you're thinking about building something, a lot of times the technology actually is that's the hardest thing to solve, right? If it doesn't work, if it has bugs, and if the site's crashing or whatever, I mean, that could be a good sign, but if you don't have the talent to fix it, you have nothing. It's a heavy lift. It is a really heavy lift to build something that works. And the second part, though, is people want it. And so I think in a weird way, Silicon Valley has a culture of building it. But then the second heavy lift that a lot of people forget is you got to make people want it, and you have to be able to market it and make it sexy and make it cool and package it. And you got to package it in a way that fits the business model of the company. And I think that's where Silicon Beach comes in, because it takes a special individual to know how to market. Once again, let's just say like some type of chemical fertilizer that is not a sexy business, but I'm sure that it's in Home Depot and someone is buying, some type of insecticide, pesticide, for billions of dollars a year. But that's a certain marketer, right? But I think here, Silicon Beach is actually, there's a double entendre, because you can have people that really understand the tech space, but then they're so close to Hollywood, whether it's the music studios or the TV and production studios, or just the PR agencies or the marketing agencies. There's just so much. So I think the value down here is like some people are able to, code or understand tech and design. But, this is a very special place, LA. Before social media, this was one of the only places where you might just walk down the street and see cameras and lights and hear action. And that's not something that the average person has the luxury to see, how things are kind of crafted and positioned and scripted and framed and presented to the outside world. And so if I was to tell a student anything, those are the differentiating factors. But I would also look at it as value can be created, because now you can go to Silicon Valley and learn and go deeper and deeper into tech, but you're going there with skills that can probably help a lot of traditionally Silicon Valley engineers are introverts. They build it, and they're relying on someone else to sell it. So you can kind of have best of both worlds. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And it's definitely a huge area of consideration, because as Joseph mentioned, all of the students who go through the program are ending with a capstone project. They're ending with a digital creation that many of them are ideas that could go to market, right? But they have to figure out how to fund it and how to get it to market, how to connect to the right people, just everything that you've had to go through in your journey.
Something like, just to double down on that, I would say if I was talking to someone in college, whether it's a freshman or a senior, surprisingly, surface level, a lot of us leave college and say those are like my golden years and I met my best friends. But your future actually will be quite predicated on who you spend time with when you're in college, who you recognize, who you respect, who you really get to bond with. And so if you, for example, you're studying digital media, but you love technology, but you're only spending time with, your frat bros and only people in your school of business, surprisingly, 10 years from now, when you have an idea and you need engineers, you won't have them in your network because you've never hung out with them. And now you won't know how to communicate with them and collaborate with them. And so that might be the difference between, being Mark Zuckerberg's roommate and being considered the co-founder of Facebook, or just simply 8 years from now, when you look back, it's like, who do I know? I have an idea, but I need an engineer. If all your friends are just great marketers, then you're going to have to pay a stranger and you're going to get taxed and pay a heavy penalty for it because you won't have relationships in that sector. So I just try to tell college students, try to think ahead of where you want to be, whether it's a founder or just working in a company, and just think about all the different personality types that would be in there and just make friends, just network across the lane, because you never know who you're going to need or who you could also help and where opportunities come from.
Thank you for saying that. And I love that last point that you just made, right? Never know who you're going to need and never know who you might help.
Yeah.
And, here at USC, we tell students from the moment they arrive, when we tell them a bunch of things, but two things we really hammer on are, number one, the power of our university and the power of this place. It's not the information that you're going to get. So many things that you learn in college, you could get for free just by Googling or getting a library card. The power is the people. Yeah. And in order to go and really get the most out of a place like USC or the USC Annenberg School, you really have to be open to reaching out and building a network. And networking so often isn't about what you can extract from someone, but what you can offer and what you can share, right? People can smell it from a million miles away.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're there to just go, hey, man, I'm going to, take the fruit of your tree and then move on. But if you're there to say, hey, I really want to support you and find out what you're doing, networking can be this great Venn diagram. I got this, you got that. Where's this crossover?
Exactly.
May I ask you a question? Because it's pretty amazing as I look at the roster on Assemble.
Yeah.
These incredible entrepreneurs, these incredible entertainers, these media moguls that you have on there. And for many people, that first introduction where you go, hey, my name's so-and-so, and, you're this big, important person, but I'd like to ask you to come and be a part of this new startup called Assemble. Mm-hmm. And tell us, how does that conversation go? When you go to reach out to some incredible person that you dream of having, and they're like a get, right? They're big. Yeah. And probably a little nervous. Tell me how that conversation goes. How do you engage with them? How do you inspire them and ask them to come and be a part of something as cool as this? How do you do that?
I think it's a lot of on my knees and pleading. No, I think in general, there's a playbook, formulated around whether you call it sales or just outreach. But as far as a personal touch, I think it's honoring and acknowledging, these individuals' accomplishments and making sure that we communicate with them, which is why we're reaching out. And then just trying to articulate a existing pain point that they have or ones that they don't even realize they have. And so for example, I'll say, hey, how many times a year do you go to conferences and speak? 2 or 3 times. And they're like, yeah. Do you know what anyone even came to hear you talk about? You're like, no. I'll go, or how many times have you gotten off stage and you felt like you've killed it? And there's Q&A at the end and there's 60 people raising their hand, but only 3 people got a chance to ask their questions. And so as soon as you walk off stage, you're like, whoa, how do I give all these individuals my personal email? Or what do I do with this, right? And so a lot of our experts encounter these moments and they've just never even thought of a solution to kind of navigate them. I go, yeah, you should just be on Assemble. People could submit you questions in real time. That way, if I don't know if you have a podcast or you're leaving, now you know what all 100 people in the room were curious about as you spoke on stage. If you get off stage, you don't have to worry about 60 people lining up and you can't even get to the restroom. They're just okay, I'll follow up with him for whatever it is I need directly. And LinkedIn works, but that's not necessarily a solution when individuals want your time. So with Assemble, it's like, hey, I have this profile. If you want a piece of my time, this is the price, and I'll prioritize it. And so, yeah, it's normally, just to answer your question, though, we approach it from acknowledgement and then introducing and solving a problem that either exists that they don't know exists, or one that we can probably forecast going to happen for our experts, that they're like, okay, yeah, this makes sense and it costs me nothing. And it feels good ultimately and looks good to give back and help. And once again, a lot of successful people, surprisingly, biggest breakthroughs or second chances normally come when they bring someone up. Look at Oprah and Tyler Perry. It's not always working with your peers, because most of the time you're either competing with your peers or they're competing against you and you don't even know it, or there's some envy or some jealousy. So oftentimes it's something from left field that normally changes the trajectory of what you're doing anyways. So why not find someone that is honored to work with you, teach them a little bit and get some, it's the music industry. There's always the next act, so yeah.
Cortney, I know you and I have talked about some other innovations that you want to add in, ways, for instance, to make it easy for people to communicate with professors rather than having to email them in an email chain that might get lost, or connect in other ways. What do you see as the next phase for Assemble? And then I think you had mentioned earlier also that because people are listening or watching this episode with you, that you would be willing to give some free time to answer their questions. So
Yeah,
that's kind of a two-phase question.
I think I can remember it. So I think for us, the next phase for us is community. I'm going to try to work with you all and see if we can just have some in-person events for students and dedicate and donate time and just provide mentorship, whether it's myself or just individuals on the platform. So and we've done a few of those things with some of your classes already, right? But, working with maybe some of the student groups and bringing in something cool and refreshing to them. But in addition, we are getting ready to roll out a college product. And the way we're envisioning it is within the university, students will have access to their professors and they can just book office hours. And if they don't need an entire 15 to 30 minute, meeting, then how do we just let them send their questions? And how do we keep this in something where it's not being added to your instructor's email address? So they have messages from faculty, messages from, their work-related professional careers. And then they have a bunch of student asks. Like, this is one platform that's consolidating, even for the professors, all of their students ask of them. And then at the end of the semester, imagine, or the end of your 4 years in college, you have every question and response from your professor, and you're not having to dig up an email. We have these short video responses or voice notes from your professor and all the questions. And you have this digital library or repository of everything that your professor ever responded to you. So that's kind of what we're doing. And I'm on the platform. Actually, we'll be updating the pricing. But if anyone that wants to just reach out and ask me questions and pick my brain, it'll be free. You can just use the app and send in a question, text it, and I'll respond, within 5 days, like we offer.
I'm going to ask you one last question now, Cortney, and I want to thank you very much for your time that you've shared, for your wisdom, insight, and inspiration in your spirit. One of the things that's so cool about podcast, versus just reading a book, is that we get to hear and feel your spirit, and you have a warmth and a kindness and a humility and a care that really comes across. And
thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So here's the last question.
Okay.
And it's a little open-ended. We always like to ask this at the end of these Mediascape episodes, and it's really putting it back on you. Is there something on your heart, something that's on your mind that you go, you know what, if I had one piece of advice, some piece of your own secret sauce that you'd care to share with other digital media entrepreneurs, leaders, managers, that you think is like one of your secrets to success, both in your career and in life, that you wouldn't mind sharing to close us out?
Yeah, so something came to mind immediately, but I want to give you two answers. Maybe one is more business related. So typically, the way I've been able to open many doors, ones that are just 10 foot tall or whatever. It's finding how to add value to the other person's situation or life or whatever they have before making a request. There's a phrase that in venture with investment, investors either do things out of fear or love. 95% of the time it's fear. They don't want to miss out on this thing, or they can't afford to miss this amazing opportunity, because if it takes off 4 years from now, their investors are saying, what happened? Why didn't you get into this? You're in LA and this company's in LA. How did you miss it? And love is only 5% because you can never predict when someone is going to just be kind with their time or their money or whatever it is that they have a value that you want. And so, yeah, maybe you're building this new app for mothers, and okay, for whatever reason, this potential investor's, wife, they just had a child or something. Okay, now in the moment, he's like, okay, I get it. But normally that may be like their only kid. So you're never going to catch that moment again, right? So anyways, love and fear. So you can typically get a lot further when you know specifically what an individual's goals are themselves, and you add value to that equation. Now there's a little arbitrage there. And more importantly, you never just want people to do favors for you and hold it over your head. You want to be able to offer value from day one as well. And typically it plays out over the course of those relationships. That's like a pretty good piece of advice. And I guess to double down on that, just like always just figure out, where's the pressure coming from for the other person on the other side of the table? You may be looking up, but they have someone that they're looking up to as well. And typically I found, like, even with my investors, for example, if I communicate with them about their investor relations, their LPs, limited partners, or the pension funds and things of where they're getting their money from, and we're just having a casual conversation around, so what are their expectations of you? They're telling me, well, we have to have a hit within 10 years of our investment strategy. But they're now looking at me as not necessarily an entrepreneur that's just looking up at them for capital, but they're looking at me as an entrepreneur that's sophisticated enough to understand all aspects of this game I'm playing. I'm not just looking at it from my lens. I understand their lens, and I also understand the people that they answer to's lens. And so then it's a way to make yourself a little bit more presentable and polished. And it's something that a lot of people don't do, understand every element of the game you're playing. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Fantastic. Cortney, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. And thank you to everybody for watching or listening to this episode of Mediascape, our series for digital changemakers, brought to you by USC Annenberg's MS in Digital Media Management program. We'll be back again next week with another amazing guest.
To learn more about the Master of Science in Digital Media Management program, visit us on the web at dmm.usc.edu.